Good afternoon, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to all of you for joining us today. Just give a moment for everyone to log in. We are so excited. I am so excited about today's program. My name is Janet Rosbeck. I'm the Director of Alumni Relations and Volunteer Engagement. I've had an accidental career in higher ed for the past 20 years and steward our alumni network of 160,000 worldwide. And we are just very excited to have today as our launch of our Baruch and Higher Education Alumni Network to serve our 3,000 plus alumni nationwide, worldwide actually, who are in various areas of higher education, in administration, as faculty. And we really look forward to building greater connections among our alumni in this huge and such an important industry to our nation, especially as we've seen over the course of the last 2 years. And we anticipate there to be change afoot. So that is what brings us here today. But first, I am delighted to introduce Nancy Aries, who is the interim dean of the Mark School of Public and International Affairs, to say a few words. Nancy.
Thank you so much, Janet. Hello, everyone. As interim dean, I welcome you here today for this kickoff event of the Higher Education Alumni Affinity Group. That's its appropriate name. What's so exciting to me about what is taking place and about the organization of the group is it acknowledges both the specialization we have here at Baruch in higher education and our program and our degree program that's marked by the Master of Science in Higher Education Administration, and the fact that it recognizes that higher education is not a profession with a singular point of entry, such as medicine, that it's hard, you can't practice medicine without being licensed. So, and it's a field that requires many specializations to be successful. So graduates of many degree programs find themselves working together, each bringing their passion and disciplinary perspectives to make higher education exceptional in its ability to educate and produce knowledge and serve their unique constituencies. So, you know, I look at today and this mix is so well represented by today's speakers, which include Tatum Thomas, an MSED graduate, who's Dean of Continuing and Professional Education at DePaul University in Chicago, Ben Roden, an MPA graduate from Marks also, who's the Vice President for Enrollment Management and Student Success at New Jersey City University. Charles Moses is an Executive MBA graduate and Dean of the University of San Francisco School of Management. And Jonathan Hill is an MBA graduate, Dean of the Seidenberg School of Computer Science and Information Systems at Pace University. So looking at this wonderful mix, today's panel is here to assess the changes that have taken place since this part of the pandemic and how they each conceive the future of higher education. The pandemic and the focus on racial justice disrupted the systems and norms that have historically guided us. We may have assumed in the early months of 2020 a return to work as we've known it prior to the pandemic shutdown, but that's no longer the case. This is the time to reconceive what we value and how we can break down long-standing barriers that have often maintained the status quo. Many alternatives have been piloted and they range from our value propositions to our day-to-day operations. It's easily observed in redesigned services, revised work policies, and for all that's occurring, however, there's no certainty to where we're going to land, which will be failed experiments, which will become our guide stars. So this is what makes today's discussion so important. It's an opportunity to be in dialogue with deans and executives whose work is fundamental to creating just and resilient educational institutions that are the backbone of this society. They each bring unique perspectives to the questions of where we'll land based on how they've experienced and responded to the changes that are occurring. And this is an opportunity for us to learn across silos. So let me express my appreciation to Janet Rosbach, my affairs, Suzanne Grossman, our Director of Career and Alumni Services, Scott Evenbeck, our Director of Higher Education, I don't know if she's here, but I'll throw out my thanks to Renee Hernandez, the president of our HEA Student Club, for getting us here today and kicking off the start of Baruch's newest alumni affinity group. So let me turn this back to you, Janet.
Thank you so very much. I really appreciate that, Nancy. And yes, we are so excited to have current higher education administration students here with us today, as well as administrators across Baruch, as well as our alumni. So as I was mentioning before, when Scott Evanbeck and I were having a chat, maybe in November, about Baruch and higher education, we said, you know, there are alumni in colleges and universities all across this country, and maybe we should create an opportunity for folks to connect. Sure, why don't we do that? I said, okay. So I started reaching out to some of our illustrious alumni, and I just think you are all in for a real treat this afternoon. We will have the panel go for an hour or so, and then have Q&A at the end. Feel free to type questions into the chat or send them to me directly. If they are particularly pertinent, I will interrupt as politely as possible the conversation, but otherwise we will definitely have time for questions at the end. So Scott, if you might kindly introduce yourself, and then I'll add each of the panelists to the spotlight.
Okay, I'm Scott Evanbeck, new to the HEA program, though I first learned of it when I joined CUNY in 2011. And at Gottman Community College, we had some incredible staff members who had graduated from the program and always spoke of it so highly. I came to the program where it was in very good hands because Dean Aries had been leading the program for a while before she was named interim dean. She provides such incredible leadership to Marks. And Nancy, I thank you for your support and thank you for being here today. What I found at Baruch is that people really stand up and deliver. I mean, that's a much quoted phrase, but you know, talking with Janet and then Nicole, others, Suzanne, who stepped up to plan today, it's just incredible how folks at Baruch are willing to go the extra mile to support students and their success. As I've come to know the HEA program, what I hear from students is that the best thing are the faculty and their fellow students. They have incredible networks. And what I hear from the faculty is what incredible students we have. So it's a real honor to be part of this program. Today's panel verifies that we have graduates from coast to coast. Today we have folks here from the New York area, from Chicago, from San Francisco, and I saw in the chat that someone's with us from London. So I guess I should have said good evening or maybe good night in that case. But it's so good to have you all here today. We'll start with a few questions and hope that each of the panelists will be able to address them. And I'd start with the question, what might our students and alumni learn from your experience in the HEA program at Marks and your subsequent role as a leader in higher ed? Tatum, I wonder if you'd be willing to go first.
Absolutely, it'd be my delight to go first. Similar to Janet, I would say that I found my accidental passion by encountering a position in higher ed at a small liberal arts institution on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, New York City, for those international callers. That institution was Marymount Manhattan College. And I say it was accidental because I was called into a temp position, which was only supposed to be a 2-week assignment. In those 2 weeks, I fell in love with the institution. I enjoyed helping students. I was nestled in the Office of Student Affairs. And as you might know, if any of you work in student affairs in particular, you get a lot of the joys, but a lot of the pains. But the overarching common theme is helping, is the help and the care for our students. And that's what I fell in love with. I think my experience at Marymount Manhattan College was about 5-6 years or so, but I began to understand that there was a lot more, vast world to higher education, but I knew that my career trajectory would not go further if I didn't get my feet firmly nestled into the academic side of the house. So I started having conversations with my mentor, who was the VP at the time. And I remember him looking at me and looking me squarely in the eyes and saying, "You must promise me that you will get your master's." I'm a little old school. So back in the day, that's what you had to do if you wanted to move up in academe. So I started exploring schools, at the same time looking for a new position. I found a new position and I found Baruch. So at the same time that I'm going through a path of engaging at New York University in an academic unit, I'm also in our higher education administration program at Baruch. So I am real world learning as I go. And my career sort of developed from there. And I realized that me transitioning from student affairs onto the academic side of the house was not an abandonment of the student experience or student care. I could further impact the student experience in the work that I was doing on the academic side of the house. My work included training and developing part-time faculty, helping people understand the student experience and student needs so much more. And I believe that the early accidental moments in my career have helped develop me to where I am now. But Baruch really helped me make sense of the world that I was in from a collegial perspective, from an, if we call it an industry perspective. I think Baruch helped crystallize and make sense of what I was experiencing. So I share that from the early years.
Great. Tatum, how many students are in your school now?
In my school, I have just over 1,000. They are primarily adult learners, and that's for the degree side of the house. They're all adult learners pursuing bachelor degrees. And then I also have a non-degree portfolio, and I have a small graduate program in educating adults. So 1,000 undergrads, which is our core focus right now.
I've lived in the Midwest for many years and would make a lot of trips to Chicago. And I know what a mark your program has made and how important it is in Chicago. So thanks so much for being with us today. Ben, how would you answer the question about what recommendations you'd make to students based upon your career and your trajectory from the HEA program?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think a lot of what Tatum said, it resonates, particularly the accidental nature of kind of the early parts of my career. And I guess I'll share with you just my favorite story that about how I really got into higher education. And it was, I had this notion that I was so frustrated with my undergraduate degree that I wanted to actually redo everything and start a new type of college. And I was at this, I have an IT background and I was working in the IT field at the time. And I figured no one's going to take me seriously. Who's going to take seriously some IT guy who thinks that higher education needs a major change? And that's kind of what drove me to explore Baruch as an option. I couldn't decide whether I wanted to go into the higher education program or the MPA program, because I was a little bit chicken about going into education because I figured I wasn't so sure. And ultimately, I was introduced to the executive MPA program and thought this is the right mix. And as it has, I started the program 3 days before 9/11. And the next 2 years in that program was just the most incredible experience of my life in terms of the people I met, the framework in which we all used to kind of just navigate what was going on in the world at the time. I see Fred Lane on the call, it was a big part of that experience for myself. And I will tell him to this day that he still says that cohort 18 was the best cohort he ever had in that program. So, but it was just an absolutely incredible experience. And in my second year in the program, I was speaking on a student panel for the next incoming group, and I was telling you a story about how I want to start a new kind of college, and everyone I tell laughs at me, except for the former dean of Marx, which was David Birdsell, who said, "Hey, let me introduce you to somebody." And it was at a dinner that we were having, and this is the accidentals, kind of accidental that I happened to tell the story in front of the dean at the time. Actually, he might have been the associate dean at the time. And he made an introduction to the dean of the School of Arts and Sciences at Baruch. And I went and told her this story about how I want to start my own college. And she laughed at me and said, "Well, why don't you come learn how to fix one before you go off and start your own?" And that kind of started me off on my higher education career. And I've been trying to fix things ever since. One day, maybe I'll get to the starting my own college part. But I guess my point is that the accidental parts of those early parts of your career are really ushered along well by this network you're building in your graduate program in ways that I just didn't understand at the time. But every step of the way, I feel like I've had some kind of Baruch network interaction that has kind of led me to kind of make the next career choice. So I would just say embrace every moment in the program that you're in. For those of you who are students and for those who are alums, stay in touch. I think it's really just, it's been an incredible journey for me.
Yeah, the affirmation of networking is what I hear from our current students. And it's so fantastic that the students not only network with one another, but that they network with the alums. And now we have this incredible new platform of beefing up the LinkedIn program to help that networking in more ways. Ben, did you ever have Dean Aries for a class?
No, but I went to work for Baruch, and so Nancy and I have had many interactions over the years in terms of fixing things that needed fixing at the university. So
I think you're two terrific fixers. So thank you. Charles, what advice would you have and gain from your experience both here at Baruch and as you've gone through your career? I'm very interested that you started out as a journalist.
Yeah, when I was an MBA student at Baruch, I was also working for Newsday on Long Island, and then they started a paper called New York Newsday. So I was kind of doing that while I was pursuing my MBA. I think I will add my voice to the chorus. I discovered academic life it's kind of an accident after a career in journalism and public policy. And the interesting thing that I discovered about it was that all the things that I did before I became an academic kind of were relevant. I had a lot of experience. I could talk about a lot with my students. And I think students resonate. It resonates with students when you're authentic, when you have some good experiences to share with them. And so I start my lecture on some crazy topic and kind of reeling them with that, and then we kind of segue into the discussion of the day from my class notes. But I think the key thing, and I think it's been said already, is that there's something about working with students that I find refreshing and renewing. And I think students will never, ever know how much they give you as someone who stands up in front of them and tries to guide them through a transformative process. And one of the biggest charges that I get every year, I get to do it twice, is commencement. Because students don't understand what that means. It's kind of a rite of passage to an academic. And I find that to be just such a thrilling, and you always wonder when they walk across the stage, what's going to happen to this one? What's going to happen to that one? And I'm always confounded because sometimes the students who struggle the most end up doing really, really, really great things. And I'm on LinkedIn, and I have an army of students who I correspond with at various points in their lives and their careers. And there's a transition. You're not a student anymore. You're kind of like an alumni. You're a stakeholder. And you have this shared experience, and the hierarchical nature of being student and teacher changes, and you become more like a trusted confidant in some cases to these people, and it's really wonderful. And I think that's what I find so renewing and refreshing. I stumbled into teaching as well. I mean, my dad was a teacher in Los Angeles back in the 60s, and he had moved from this segregated south to LA. He was one of those migrants. And his dream, I think his dream would have been to be a high school principal. I think he would have considered his life to have worked if he had gotten there, but he died before he got there. But had he lived, and had he said to me, son, I want you to be a teacher like me, I probably would have said no. So the ultimate irony for me here is here I am, I'm a teacher. And I think that's what we all are, teachers, even though we may have academic ranks or administrative ranks. I think at the bottom line is that we're teachers. We're interested in educating others. And I find that to be a cause, something we're fighting for. And so I've been very fortunate. As I said, public policy, journalism, and now academia. And I must say that all the journalism serves me well because when I was getting my doctorate, I could write well and I could write quick. And so, I cranked out my dissertation in 4 months, and that was good. I took it and then I published it, in 3 or 4 places. And I like research, but I really like being in the world of ideas. I like working with students. I like working with my colleagues, really, really smart people who are committed to exploration, creating new knowledge. And I think that's what's been the biggest charge for me. And I've been able to do it all over the world. And so one of my first academic experiences was in South Africa, right after the Nelson Mandela became president. And I actually met Nelson Mandela through one of the faculty members at Baruch. Well, he's an emeritus now, Professor Prakash Sethi. And really, really good guy. I have professors that I met at Baruch, I remember to this day. Harry Rosen is one of my advisors. He's now late, I think he's passed away. Harris Jack Shapiro, another professor. John Trinkus. These were great minds, and they embraced me. And I just feel so grateful for the experience of being at Baruch. And I'm particularly, as an alumnus, I'm particularly proud of how the school and university has emerged and evolved since I left, kind of like fine wine, doing better now, much better now than it did then. And so I'm very proud of my association with Baruch.
Charles, you just moved to a new position too, right? Could you share a bit about that?
Yeah, they announced yesterday that I'm going to be moving over to the University of Pacific, which is in Stockton, California, which is about 85 miles east of San Francisco. And I'll be the dean of the Eberhart School of Business there. And also going to be doing a lot of kind of on the cabinet, kind of quasi-cabinet level, doing some economic development things in the Central Valley. So it'll be fun.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Jonathan, it's so good of you to be here today. Jonathan and I actually met a few years ago when I was working at a community college, and we shared an interest in helping first-year students get off to a good start. So it's a delight to know that you're a Baruch alumnus and that you're willing to be with us today from PACE. Could you please share a bit about your experience, Jonathan?
Scott, I'd love to. And I have to say, number one, I am truly honored to be asked to be here. What impressive people I have a chance to talk with. So Janet, you should be a fortune teller or something, because you've really picked an assembly of people that I think have a very similar origin story. And I grew up in Queens and decided I wanted to get as far out of the city as I possibly could. So I went to Charles' upcoming new post, University of the Pacific, to be a football hero. And that kind of worked out the way it usually does. And I was back in Queens, 4 years later, degree in hand, and wondering what to do with myself. And one of my first jobs was working with a guy named Stu Schulman, who ran this digital marketing company back in the 80s, who also was a department chair at Kingsborough Community College. And one day I walked into the office and he got sort of a strange look in his eye, much like your experience, it sounds like, Tatum. And he sort of looked at me and said, "Yeah, you're a bullshit artist. You can do this." And he threw a textbook at me and said I was teaching that night at 6 o'clock, an intro to marketing class. And Kingsborough Community College, 2 hours away on the subway out in beautiful Brighton Beach. And the class ranged in age from 18 to 80, quite literally, community college evening class. And I was really bad at it. But I remembered the students' names, and they forgave me that and really taught me how to connect with them. And after a few years, I got sort of good at it. And as Stuart, my mentor, moved up in the CUNY hierarchy, I got lots of experiences with the fledgling online program and starting an entrepreneurship program at Queens College. But then it was the late 90s and the world was just exploding in Silicon Valley. And I knew California and I felt like life was passing me by. And I cashed in my tenure track position and went out to California to be a .com millionaire for a few years. And like my burgeoning football career, my .com millions sort of slipped away also. And once again, I was back home in New York and looking for graduate programs. And a woman who was a well-known higher education consultant said to me, politically, you should stay in CUNY. And if you want a world-class business education, go to Baruch. And so I did. And I did the executive MBA cohort, and we would give mean looks to the MPA cohort across the hall when it was time for the bagels to be served in the morning. But I got a world-class education. And my cohort of 24 people is still close today, 20 years after graduation. And, people in healthcare and media, all of the finance, fintech, all of the important businesses in New York. And we have been there as a support network for each other for all of this time. And they're very, very dear friends. I then had an opportunity to come to Pace and build a program, and that went well. So I was asked to build another program, and I had come to Pace expecting to stay for a semester to build that first program. And I've been here for almost 19 years now and served as an assistant dean, an associate dean, and then an interim dean. So be careful, Nancy. And then was named dean, and I'm in the fourth year of a 7-year term at this point. And it's been an incredible run. I think I have one of the best jobs in the world, short of being a dean in San Francisco or Stockton, in that I start my morning at a middle school in East Harlem looking at digital divide issues. And then I get to have lunch with executives from Microsoft and Google. And then I get to spend an afternoon with some of our wonderful undergraduates and then do an evening seminar for some of our grad students. And I owe that opportunity very, very much to CUNY and very specifically to Baruch. And this is an absolutely wonderful business. I've had my stints in industry, and those were challenging and I think very important developmental parts of my personal and professional life. But the most fulfillment I have found personally and professionally has been in higher education. So it's a wonderful business and lots of challenges today, but the opportunities are just really exciting.
Thank you. I'm really taken by your account of your perfect day. And could you say a bit more about what your work is with the students up in Harlem?
We are working with, we work with a number of schools in the New York City Department of Education. This is a particular school that's focused on math, science, and technology. And like a lot of the public schools in the city, they're in an old building that until a few years ago was still heated by coal. The edifice is so dense you can't get wireless in a lot of the building. And so we actually brought Verizon in to help jury rig a system so that they could truly be a computer school. They wanted to go all iPad, but they didn't have the network to do that. So we've brought in grad students to help with that process and work with their faculty, with their teachers, to make it possible for them to use digital tools in the classroom.
Wow, that's terrific. For our second question, I wanted to lead off by asking Jonathan, because he coined the term. We've come through quite a time these last couple of years with the pandemic, with our identification of the importance being anti-racist institutions, of ensuring that DEI is at the center of our work. That when we talked earlier across the panel, Jonathan, you made reference to driving in heavy fog, that in these days it's sometimes hard to know where we're going. And so the question is, what's the light ahead? Is there good that can come from our experience of these last couple years? I mean, what do you see on the horizon?
Well, it's, I mean, the challenges are very significant, Scott, and my colleagues here are, absolutely, waist deep in trying to deal with that. There is blessedly a huge emphasis nationally and internationally to some extent on diversity and inclusion, and in creating a sense of belonging for all students. I mean, I am blessed to have been in New York City and to have grown up in this incredibly diverse environment. And I'm blessed to have learned this business at CUNY, which in lots of ways was forced to cope with this and to create opportunities for students, of color and other underserved populations 50 years ago. And so, I have a track record. I have had mentors, Otis Hill, who was associate provost at Kingsborough for many years, and then was both at CUNY Central and up at Hostos College in the Bronx. His focus was very much on creating opportunity for African-American males. And I have taken that on as a really important issue and have brought that here in my practice at Pace, and have found a lot of support for that, and people who are willing to fund those opportunities at a private university, which is really, really good. I think there's a wider issue, though, in terms of the driving in the fog analogy. We are here to serve our students. And in 2 years of pandemic, these folks have found continuing their studies to be very, very challenging. For example, an undergraduate student who is living in a 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn with parents, grandparents, siblings. There's one computer and a wonky internet connection. How do they all do their homework? How did they all attend Zoom class if it's at the same time? There are a lot of these technology access questions that have impacted equal access to education. And I think that's turned a lot of students off. We see here at Pace, we see around the country and around the world, students who are saying, you know what, this online thing is not satisfying for me. I don't learn well this way. And I'm going to pull back. I'm just going to take a leave of absence, and I'll come back when it gets better. On the other hand, Janet was mentioning that all of a sudden people are coming back to the office and coming back to work. That creates another set of demands. And anecdotally, from our experience here at Pace, about 20% of our student population wants to be back in person and working. On the other side of that, another 20% are genuinely afraid of getting ill, or particularly of bringing illness home to their parents or grandparents. And they are really hesitant to get back in person. They're really hesitant to get back on the subway and come to school. And somewhere in the middle, there's this 60%. And we make a lot of decisions based on what our students want. There's that element that they are our customers, and we create programs and we drive opportunities that are going to meet their interests and wishes. I think a lot of these folks are not quite sure what they want in terms of an educational experience. Is it hybrid? I think on one hand, people have gotten very used to being able to Zoom into class from wherever they are. If they're at the office, if they're at home, if they're on the road, on the bus, they can do that. It's going to be hard to rebuild that in-person dynamic, certainly at a commuter school like Baruch or Pace or USF for that matter. Paul, all of us, we're in that area. So in a nutshell, we're trying to figure out what our students want at a time when many of them are not sure what they want.
I have a logistical question about teaching distance. That one of the things I hear about is that students often don't want to turn their cameras on. Is that something that you faced?
Significantly. I was in, the first 2 weeks of the semester were online, and then, we're 3 weeks now into what's supposed to be in person, and I went into one of our introduction to computer science classes, 24 students. There were 4 students in the classroom and 20 online, and only 4 of those online actually had their cameras on. The rest were black boxes. And I could see the frustration on the faculty members' face. And that's one of the things in the pandemic that I know we'll talk about. But the usual markers, the feedback markers that faculty look for, seeing the student's eyes, that they get it, being over to look over their shoulder as they're doing a problem set. Really hard to do that online. And I think there's a lot of frustration and burnout in the faculty as a result.
At my former college, right after COVID happened, we, of course, went online with everybody else and decided that we were doing the right thing by having all the classes be asynchronous, because, you don't know what students have access to what technology when. And then we had a town hall, I don't know, a couple of weeks after the murder of George Floyd, and the students felt very abandoned. If we would have been in person, every conversation in the hallway, every class would have started with, "Hey, how you're doing?" But with the asynchronous, we missed that, serendipity of being together and being able to check in with one another. That the students tell me a lot about our classes in the HEA program, and one of our faculty teaches asynchronously, but that faculty member also is in touch with every student every week. And so, this whole business of how we learn in this new environment is incredible.
If I may, Scott, at DePaul, we transitioned into the pandemic already having a pretty robust footprint of online courses, but that doesn't mean that it came without lessons, the transition, I should say. And we do find that to be able to effectively engage, we had to employ a whole roster of new training and development opportunities for faculty, so that if they were in an environment where most of the cameras are off, how else might they be able to solicit engagement that was conducive to the learning experience? So part of it was, okay, we're going to accept as a college, as an institution, that cameras will be off, but that does not mean that our students can't and will not engage in the learning experience. So it became what type of metrics that we might use to determine how our students are learning, even though cameras are off. So it's not about necessarily, we put it back on the learning versus how people are presenting themselves in class. And just fundamentally, if we're going to be thinking about diversity and equity, I was never comfortable with saying you must have a camera on, because we don't know people's situations. I've seen students take their online classes sitting in a car, as Jonathan said, because there weren't any options to sit at home. But I do know that not everyone is of the same means, or people are multitasking. Right? We've become a more engaged society, and sometimes the camera needs to be off so you can eat lunch while you learn at the same time.
So I have a crazy story. I'm on a lot of boards, as you all are, and the guy who really took the cake was an administrator from a university I won't name, but he was ready to go into surgery, and he had that blue thing on his head, and he came on the Zoom. And I thought, I appreciate your dedication, but there's only so far you really need to go. So I would have turned the camera off for him, but anyway. So then, how would you address that question about coming out of the fog and where we're going? Is there light at the end of the tunnel? What are your thoughts?
Well, I guess I'm an eternal optimist. I always think there's light at the end of the tunnel, but I think, we have struggled with many of the same challenges that I think probably every university has in terms of how to effectively plan to kind of meet the needs of our students and to effectively resource, kind of last minute the needs of the university. But in addition to the challenges of a learning environment and the scheduling of what's the right mix of online and in person, I mean, I know CUNY is probably my experience working at CUNY for about a decade it is different in the sense that at New Jersey City University, we're also a residential, we're primarily commuter institution, but we also about 10% residential. So we didn't have the luxury of shutting down. We didn't send all the students home. We had hundreds of students living on campus and services need to be up and running. And so we were never fully remote. So it was a different, and for those institutions who have even larger residential populations, it was a very different type of challenge. But I'll speak a little bit from my perspective as an enrollment manager as well, that I think that the bigger challenge wasn't how to meet the instructional needs and the technology needs. I think the bigger challenge was that I believe we lost a generation of low-income students in higher education over the last couple of years. In New Jersey, and I share this with our colleagues on the call here and on a previous kind of prep call, in New Jersey, if you take a look at the institutions and line them up in terms of lowest median family income of institutions to the highest in New Jersey, it is exactly the same chart of the highest enrollment drops to the lowest enrollment drops. I mean, everyone took an enrollment hit, but the institutions that are serving low-income students decimated. I mean, just absolutely decimated. And I think that that's something that's going to be lingering for a long time. I mean, I think some of the technology challenges, they're correlated with income issues as well. I think we see higher correlations with students of color in the lower income brackets, at least particularly in northern New Jersey, where I am. And I think that this is the ongoing impact of the pandemic, is that those issues don't go away overnight. New Jersey City University, we have the lowest income student body in the state of New Jersey, with the exception of maybe 2 or 3 community colleges, and a long shot away from the next, institution's kind of level of student affluence. And this is the thing that I'm struggling with on a daily basis, which is that it's not just about the students who actually figured a way to stay in college. It's the 1,000 that we lost, over the last couple of years, and how do you re-engage them when their families are still in crisis, and where a college education represents a third of the entire family income and annually. So I think, to me, I've thought a lot about what we've been doing at NJCU is we're engaging state legislators, we're engaging the governor's office and helping them understand that this isn't something that can be addressed institution by institution, that there has to be a larger response across higher education in partnership with governments to make this happen at a time when state support for higher education has been decreasing, year after year. New Jersey being an exception this year, they had a kind of a historic increase in their direct student aid programs. But I really think that this is where a lot of the focus needs to be for higher education leadership right now, is about building back a future for what is otherwise a lost generation of students in higher education. And I think that, from my perspective, it's the most critical issue to work on right now.
Marks is a policy school, and what I think about is if we thought carefully about policies that we might change as a function of what we've learned in the pandemic. And one example I think of is, I'll never forget, there was a student once at the institution where I worked at the time whose registration got blocked because she owed $14. I mean, I was in perpetual arguments with the bursar forever, but I couldn't get him to change it. When I found that out, I chased her out of the building, but I couldn't catch her because I was just going to pay the $14. And now I read that a number of institutions are rethinking policies like that. I mean, given your responsibilities at your campus, are you thinking about things like that ought to be attended to?
Absolutely. And I thought that I saw an announcement that was a CUNY that's actually no longer going to hold transcripts for students who owe money. But I think along the way, we've certainly, I mean, let's say loosening the payment regulations is an understatement. Basically, we're saying the highest priority is progress towards degree, and that we're going to figure this out together. You know, there's been a significant amount of federal dollars that have also come into higher education in the last couple of years to try to help offset some of those costs for institutions. And I think another interesting thing will be at some point when we start seeing the assessment of how different institutions use these funds. I mean, there was, I would say, pretty broad, you know, ability to can use some of these institutional and student-specific funds. And I think that you're going to find that everyone did a little bit differently. So I think for those who are looking to go on a doctoral track, I think there's going to be some really interesting dissertation, you know, topics in the future. But I think more progressive student financial policies absolutely has been I don't think there's an institution across the board who hasn't had to move in that direction right now. The question is, how do you walk it back to a place where your CFOs aren't like going bananas because the unpaid bills is just off the charts right now.
Right. Thank you, Charles. How would you address the question that we've been perhaps driving in a heavy fog, and where are we going, and what, if any, good might come of what we've learned?
I've always thought that higher education is challenged. We're not agile enough. We're not able to keep pace with the pace of creation of knowledge and trying to bring best practices into our classrooms and interactions with our students. And so I think one of the benefits of the pandemic has been it's forced us to get up on our toes and to maneuver and to tack. We have to be more agile. We have to think about it. So we had a long debate at USF, and as you know, universities will temporize. Long debate about whether we should go online. Well, guess what? 2 years ago in March, we went online and we did it in a hurry, and we had to do it. It wasn't an experiment. We had to make it work, and guess what? We made it work. And so now we have this online muscle. And as we move through the pandemic, the question then becomes, if we can exit the pandemic, how would we retain this muscle, and what would it allow us to do that we couldn't do before? So we work with very discrete groups of students. For example, we have lots and lots of transfer students. And in California, USF is a private, it's a Jesuit Catholic institution. And we have the California state system and University of California system, both of whom have very, very well-defined articulation agreements with junior colleges across the state that makes it competitive disadvantageous, make it disadvantageous for us to work with students who are transferring. We fixed that problem. We went to work on that problem. So technology helped us with that. I have a tremendous number of international students, mostly in Asia, spread out across Asia. And some of them have just had challenges, even in Biden administration, getting the visas to come and stay in San Francisco and pursue their education. So we're hoping that the technological advances that we've adopted, the online, will help us to retain those students meaningfully. The big challenge that we face, however, is that students who come to a place like San Francisco to pursue a college education want to be in San Francisco. Why? Because maybe 15 or 20 of the world's most iconic brands are located here. They want to rub shoulders. They want to get involved in the .com community. They may have an idea that they'd like to pursue, an entrepreneurial idea. And there is that kind of a dynamic in the community. And so when you're not here, it does put you at somewhat of a disadvantage. Another thing that we really were challenged to do during the pandemic was maintaining all the co-curricular activities. We have students spread out all over this region, all over the state, and around the country doing all kinds of practicums and other types of experiences. And so to some extent, in the early part of the pandemic that suffered. It's not so much anymore. I think we've kind of gotten it down right. And now that we can travel a little bit more, we're starting to get our students back on the road. We're a big believer in kind of, working outside of the community, working outside of the university campus to learn. And so, we think that we're doing a better job of that now. My school in particular is coming up on its 100th anniversary in 2 years. And so what I've got our faculty and staff looking at is, what do we want to be for the next 100 years? And then let me just segue a little bit. Mention DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. USF was, I think, #1 in the country for diversity, equity, inclusion. I think by US News and World Report, ranked that way. And that's very nice and everything like that, but there's still a lot of work to be done. And so we have a provost who just recently joined us from Mills College, which is a women's college across the bay in Oakland. And she has taken DEI on. It is the #1 priority for our university. And right now she's leading a discussion with our faculty union. We have unionized faculty to see if we can do carve-outs, kind of like Rooney Rule style carve-outs for some of our term faculty hiring. And so we're going through a whole process of kind of trying to institutionalize DEI for our term faculty. And it's a big process. The union is not particularly favorable to that now, but because she has made it a priority, I think the whole institution is having to adjust and grow. And so I'm very excited about this. No, it's not just a conversation about DEI, but they're actually doing it and trying to make it a part of our ethos on campus. And I think that's really, really important. But we are challenged, as I said earlier, to be more agile, to be able to move a little bit quicker in terms of the way we adopt new programs, the way we work with students, addressing student needs and concerns. The cost of education, as you all know, is reaching unsustainable levels. And we're having to discount our tuitions, I think, ridiculously, in some cases, 50 cents on the dollar. And I think that economic model is forcing, I think we're headed for a reckoning in higher education. We're going to have to really look at our business model and how we deal with this. I'm fortunate at USF, I have lots of resources that I can use to support students, scholarship, stuff like that. But I think the real challenge is, what are our schools going to look like 10 years from now? Someone talked about the digital divide, but we have the same problem. Students who may not be in an environment where the internet works well, or maybe unable to study. And so we've been trying to flex to meet their needs. I think we're doing a pretty good job of it. Our enrollment numbers are creeping up, but we're still going to be faced with the fact that we're not going to have as many students, college-age students. I think adult learners are going to play a bigger part of our demographic in the future. I think we're going to be providing services to people, to corporations and other entities who have high-skilled employees that they want to retain. I'm doing some of that now. I have a contract, in fact, 2 contracts with a corporation, one of the big 4 accounting firms, and we're going to be, training their skilled employees, MBA and Master's of Arts in accounting, and so they're paying premium, and that's going to offset some of the discounting that I'm doing elsewhere in my school. So again, agility is important. Looking forward. We don't have a lot of time to do like we do in academia, to talk about things. We have to kind of talk about it and then get things done. So that's what I've been facing.
Wow. Thank you. Besides representation on the faculty and staff, what other measures is your campus taking to make DEI be more central to the life of the campus?
DEI plays out in everything that we do. You could have a faculty member who says something, and you've seen some of these in the news of late. Faculty members say things that are deliberately offensive to students. That we have to promote a discussion in our school about how to handle controversial topics without infringing on academic freedom or freedom of speech. But we do have students, a new generation of students who will will challenge a faculty member when they say something in class that's inappropriate. That's one dimension. You also have interest groups and clubs on campus that are formed around controversial topics, and they have to have a voice. They have to have a place in our community. The question is how a university is like a culture of activity, and it's intellectual activity, and it's a battle of ideas, and you want that, and that makes a university. It gives life to the university. At the same time, you don't want some of the dystopian aspects of it to creep in, the intolerance, and certainly the violence that we've seen in some institutions in our country of late. So it is a real challenge, I think, to lead in those circumstances. But I believe in academic freedom, and I believe in the First Amendment. And so I believe that that's something we have to fight for. We also, I think, in universities, and even as higher administrators, may not be presidents of universities, but facts are important. And a lot of institutions in our country, facts are being called into question. I think it was Henry Kissinger said, you have the right, to your opinion, but not to your facts.
Right.
And I think that people are in an institution. This is the place where these things get sussed out, and it should be that way. And so, how do you create that environment? Vigorous exchange of ideas, exchange of viewpoints, transformative experience that is as inclusive as possible. My personal position is that I try to be the kind of professor and administrator that I would have liked to have had when I was coming along earlier in my life. And so we need some place to go where people will listen and people will engage. Another part of academia that I think is a problem is disengagement. It's a cancer. When you have people who get so turned off that you don't even hear them. It's possible to be at an institution as a student or even a faculty member and not do anything other than teach your classes or go to class and go home. And I think then we lose that voice in the community. So we always have to be asking ourselves, are we being as inclusive as we need to be? We cannot fall in love with our own propaganda. I'm an African-American man. I lead a DEI initiative in my school, but the first thing that we do was self-study. Who are we? Are we who we say we are? So many challenges.
Thank you so much.
Scott, if I could interject, just as a perspective, as a member of kind of the executive team at an institution that, in JCU, we are a majority minority student serving institution. But I'm a member, as a white man and as a member of a predominantly white senior team and a predominantly white board of trustees. I think, as an institution, we've been going through a phase of, we really need to look ourselves in the mirror in terms of what are we committed to? And I think from my perspective, is that institutions need to be deliberate about DEI initiatives. And from my perspective, and again, it's my enrollment management lens, which is we leverage money to entice students here. This is about putting your money where your mouth is. I think student clubs are fantastic. I think faculty hiring initiatives to try to hire, faculty from, to kind of diversify your faculty to be a reflection of your student body. This requires money. I mean, this is not stuff that just happens without significant investment. And I think, there's a difference between institutions that, pay DEI initiatives lip service and those who actually make real fundamental changes in the way they resource programs, because these kinds of things, these are not going to get fixed overnight, right? And it has to be sustained, and that sustained effort usually comes from a funding plan, right? And so this is what we talk about at the executive level. It's like, where's the money? Where are we putting this into capital funding? Where are we putting these things into kind of operational, and that's not to say that we don't need to create all these other structures to kind of help us spend the money, but at a fundamental level, there needs to be a planning structure and a resource structure that is dedicated and very deliberately investing in DEI initiatives. And so that's my perspective on this.
Yeah, I agree with that. Tatum, were you gonna speak up?
Yeah, I do agree that we have to be deliberate in our actions. And first it comes from a point of thinking about where we are, sometimes as a country, sometimes globally, particularly in our country, we're talking about writing perhaps hundreds and hundreds of years of a challenge. And I think most recently, even if we think back to George Floyd and what happened in the country, it was sort of this trauma-informed call to action where there was so much activity because people wanted to be able to commit in a tangible way to influencing change. I believe that some of those emergent themes of let's do have trickled into our organizations, but it's equally as important to take a step back and do some of what Ben talked about in terms of the assessment of what truly is happening within the organizations. Go deeper, look systemically. Are your people of color on pathways towards promotion? Or do they all have the same type of position within an organization? That's something that's systemic that should be looked at. There's all of these, in addition to programming efforts or funding strategies for more enrollment, we have to open up the hood and look underneath to be able to say, okay, where within our organization might we be contributing to the challenges that exist by way of policy, by way of a lack of development. I'll give you some great things from an interesting behind the scenes. I'll share with you. We were on a faculty committee and we were talking about awards. And they kept going on and on. The faculty, some of our faculty of color were very disappointed, and they revealed to me that they don't remember when the last time that a person of color won the Excellence Award in teaching. That hurt me. You see how I present, and I identify, yes, as a Black woman. It hurt me to the core. And I can't react all the time emotionally, but I did say, okay. But no, before I spoke, another faculty member said, well, we have a great process. We look at the nominations that we have and we vet and we elevate excellence. And I said, there is something fundamentally wrong with what you're saying. And it's not about your process, because there's an assumption that there's a level playing field to begin with. And what I'd like to know is about the data. So how many applications have been submitted? Does that align with the number of faculty of color that we have in the institution? What programs do we have so that they can successfully go through the nomination process? What in our system can we adjust to help catalyze more nominations? I'm not saying give handouts, but how are we elevating the preparedness of potentially vulnerable communities in need that might need more nurturing? And it does exist within our institution among the ranks of faculty. So I share that because we have to also think systemically within our organizations about the policies that we create, similar to the issue with students and their financial aid.
Right.
Where have we created these roadblocks for inclusivity? And I just think that more and more, we had a significant spark in our call to action across various institutions, but we can't let them fall on programming activities and throwing money at it if we're going to be repeating the same behaviors within our policies and processes.
Right. I couldn't agree more.
You know something, Tatum?
Mhm.
We are actually in the second 25 years of discussion about diversity, equity, and inclusion.
I'm telling you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's some of the things that universities are doing are so woeful and anemic, as if they're, if you hire a diversity, equity, and inclusion person, that's going to solve the problem.
Mhm.
That's not how you solve the problem. It really is a top-down process, a bottom-up process, excuse me, that involves all aspects of what we do, everything from what we procure to who we hire as faculty, to how we work with our students, to how we teach,
Mhm.
those kinds of things. And it's really a thoroughgoing process. And so what I'm learning is a lot of institutions are not up for, to
Yeah.
be honest with you.
I agree, Charles. Where something tangible for the students on the call, a tangible action. Right now, we are rolling out a university-wide assessment, a university-wide DEI assessment, and it's designed to bring up what we're doing, what we're not doing, and where opportunities lie, because there's been so much activity. We don't even have an inventory of everything that's happening across the university, but we want to start there with understanding what's happening so that we can also see what some of the gaps are as well. But you're right, Charles, this is not new. These challenges aren't new. We've been going through them for a while. And to think about Jonathan's statement about driving in the fog, we're always going to encounter some type of weather pattern change. It could be the torrential rains that you experience in a downpour in Florida. It could be icy roads in Montana. But then it could be the sunshine that Charles brags about as well. And what will we as leaders do during those intervals of change in the inclement weather or sunshine weather? What will we do when times get a little challenging? We can't wait till those challenging times to act. We can't know that weather might change and then don't bring the umbrella. No, we prepare for it because we know it's going to rain one day. So maybe I'll just own an umbrella and be ready for it.
And I think these access issues are impacting us at the student level. They're also impacting us at the faculty level. One of my colleagues, African-American woman, last week was laughing. She said, "I'm up to 11 this week." I said, "What do you mean?" "I've been asked to join 11 nonprofit boards because they all want an African-American woman in technology." And so, as flattering as that is to get all these requests, at a certain point, you don't know me. You're picking me because of my photo on LinkedIn and the basic things you see about my credentials. And I think that can be a little offensive. There's a huge pipeline issue. My counterpart at Georgia Tech, who's a wonderful spokesperson on diversity and in computer science, he pointed out that a few years ago, 80% of the African-American PhD graduates came out of the top 20 universities, Ivies in Michigan and so on. And they all took jobs in those same institutions. They sort of trade back and forth. And I was recently trying to hire a young African-American woman cybersecurity specialist from a good school in the South who was interested in coming home to New York, but there were 4 institutions that wanted her and the bidding got in excess of $200,000. And I can't sustainably do that. And it's very, very frustrating. And I think one of the things I've wanted to do is be sure that we had faculty in the classroom who looked like the students that they were teaching to. My freshman class this year was 73% minority and underserved. And that is a wonderful strength of Pace University and certainly the CUNY system. And, our students are very much the future, certainly in the technology space where I work. That's what these companies want. And that's what the future of technology tools demands, and knows that certainly very, very well. But we've got to build a pipeline and make ease of access into graduate school a reality for these folks. There have been some really good questions about how do I pick a doctoral program? There are so many out there, and how do I get a degree that will serve me as I go forward? And I chose, to a certain extent, I made my choice, to go to Baruch for my graduate degree and to Pace for my doctoral degree. There were some expediency and some political things that I had to factor into that, not to mention the cost factor. And, that's certainly not out of the 20th century academic career playbook. And so that's, and we can have that discussion, a little bit later or offline, because I noticed a number of you are very interested in that. But, there are big opportunities, but important decisions to make along the way to developing that pipeline.
I may jump in. This has been an incredible conversation, and I thank you all for your participation. Jonathan, your comment just now is right on, that all the questions that I have received have been about the talent side of higher education, and how have your institutions experienced the Great Resignation, and how can this next generation of higher education leaders find mentors and find programs and opportunities to help them prepare to fill these roles. So why don't we start with sort of what the HR portrait is like at each of your institutions. Ben, do you want to start?
Well, sure. And we've certainly seen a significant number of separations from the university. I mean, I think we've had enrollment challenges in the last, few years. And so we've done everything under the sun, from voluntary separation programs to, I think just about every potential option we have to avoid having to talk about a layoff type of scenario at the institution. And a lot of that means as people leave, you need to reorganize, to continually reorganize and kind of innovate in terms of the way you're providing services with fewer people, and to develop opportunities for promotional opportunities within. I think there's a silver lining on some level for those who stay. But I think that this is, in some ways, again, I've been planning as an enrollment manager and knowing that there's a demographic shift that's coming in 2026. That's going to be, the Northeast is going to see a 15 to 20% contraction in total number of, college going students. Then in some ways, the pandemic has just accelerated what we've had to do to kind of get ready, which is that institutions need to get leaner and meaner, more efficient, likely need to be smaller in terms of size of their staffing. And I think the smart institutions are going to realize that they need to preserve their instructional staffing. And I think those are hard conversations at universities. And it was one of the points that I wanted to make about what I think is going to come out of this pandemic for a lot of institutions, where I hope comes out of this for a lot of institutions, is that this notion of shared governance. I think higher education really has gone through a kind of a corporatization of sorts in terms of leadership. Once upon a time, it was faculty who were the presidents of every institution. And now that's kind of faded away, where you have kind of professional presidents who've come in, and there's a very different way in which running universities like a business. And I think there's obviously some good things have come out of that as well. But I think what I've experienced in my position is that what was so critical about moving through this pandemic, and what is so critical moving into major shifts in terms of the size of your institution and planning for future, is that the conversation between faculty and students and administration needs to be robust and rich, right? And I think we're supposed to be these democratic institutions where you have kind of committee work and recommendations, and bubbles up, and we develop a strategic plan it's a consensus document. But a lot of those things happen in name only, right? And it's kind of like we're going through the motions of doing things we need to do. And I think what we've discovered is that those conversations, the dialogue with students about what needs to be there for them to be successful, the dialogue with faculty about what they need, is really, really, I think, for those institutions that have veered away in terms of kind of like a top-down approach. I think someone else said this, it needs to be a bottom-up kind of solution. I think that institutions don't kind of get their act together in terms of their shared governance, are going to really struggle moving forward. And I think about the impact of particularly CUNY, obviously in New Jersey as well, highly unionized environments. The way in which staffing is prioritized isn't exactly probably what it needs to be able to address kind of a contraction of the entire market. And I think those are hard conversations unless you have a lot of trust built into them, that don't happen overnight, right? I think institutions that are investing in that trusting dialogue right now are the ones who are gonna move through this, more effectively.
Thank you so much, Ben. Tatum?
Yeah, I think I listen to what I hear or what I read and interpret what I read. And if we were to directly ask the question about positions and the opportunities in higher ed to our HR unit, I think they would say, oh, yes, we have available jobs. They're on the website. They're posted. There's over 100 available opportunities at DePaul. We're all doing well. And oh, even this morning I said, are they the right type of opportunities that come with the right type of package? Do they align with the personal convictions of the people that are looking for those roles? And I would say that to any one of our students or fellow alumni is that we all know the buzz term right now, Great Resignation. At the core of that, trickle down, strip away the buzzword that's out there now, is job satisfaction. And what makes people satisfied in their roles and content with what they do. Not everyone's gonna, almost skip to work every day because they get to work with students, right? There's all these other factors, right? I have to think about my faculty. I have to think about raising money. I have to think about innovative technology practices that are gonna enhance the learning experience. There's so many other things to think about that maybe I'm not as happy every single time. But what will make me content in my role? And I think that's what we have to think about when we're considering positions that are out there. So if there's any student that's looking at the higher ed landscape, I think it's fundamentally transformed from when I was looking for a job. I really looked at the experience. When I talked about going from student affairs to academia, I said, oh, wow, this position, I get to work within an academic division. That was it. I get a job. Is it a good institution? Who will be my boss? Who will I learn from them? There were basics. I wasn't really thinking about lifestyle or thinking about being more remote. I just lost a very good colleague, a very good partner, because she found an opportunity in higher ed that was fully remote. No way that I could get that person to stay. I can't offer that. So I think the environment, the employment landscape in higher ed is fundamentally changing. And our institutions have got to change with it. It's what we talked about earlier in terms of the agility. But with that agility is going to come greater resilience so that we can weather the future storms, as Jonathan has given us our theme for the day, weathering the storms. I think more than anything, I think the talent is out there. It's how will our institutions align with the preferences of the competitive workforce that's out there. They're very competitive. The talent is there. I don't know if in general, what we have to offer as a benefits package will align with the future individual. Gone are, like back in the day, we knew back in the day, depending on what role you're considering, are we giving housing anymore? Do we need to now that we're remote? Okay, maybe housing goes out the window. What else is there? Besides a paycheck, what are we offering? Right? If we're talking about a constricted workforce, now there's not more people to do the job. And there's what are we offering besides come work for us? That's what we have to think about as an organization, as organizations. But yes, the jobs are there. But I say to anyone, make sure they're the right ones for you.
Really, really well said. And one of the questions, Tatum, was like, how many of these institutions are hiring? And I think probably the answer is everyone is hiring. Yeah. But is it the right role for you? Is it the right institution for you? Is it the right fit?
Yeah. If I can, Janet, a couple of other tips. Yes, you touched on it. Is it the right institution for you? I would say to any student on the call, try to explore the governance structure in the institutions, get really in tune with how decisions are made. And if you are more in the administrative lens, what type of voice might administrators have in some institutions? Also think about the mission of the institution and read those words very carefully. Some institutions will talk all about excellence, but then there's no commitment to serving those most in need. And sometimes when you find certain language in terms in mission statements, you can pick up on a few key indicators. So be very astute and remember to interview them like they're interviewing you.
Tips. Those are great tips. And your comment, Tatum, about sort of what voice do administrators have? I remember attending a meeting once where it just so happened administrators sat on one side of the table and faculty sat on the other side of the table, just by, you know, familiarity. And the administrators were all saying the students are most important, and the faculty side, the faculty are most important. We have only a few minutes left. Charles and Jonathan, I'll start with Charles. Do you have any words to share with those who are in the field and aspirational, knowing that we're in a challenging place and that we will have many more conversations in the future?
I would just say people that are going to be in higher education administration, find some area, and there's plenty of areas for it, where you can innovate, where you can solve a problem that your institution is not solving. There are lots and lots and lots of voids out there. And I got involved in higher education administration because there was a period in the school, one of my previous institutions, where we didn't have a dean for about 6 months. And so the students were coming to me because I was a sympathetic ear. And so one of the provosts saw it, one of the associate provosts saw it. And so one Friday I was asked to become the dean. And I'd only been tenured for a year at the time.
Wow.
And so, but there's a lot of opportunity. Be willing to solve a problem. Be willing to bring your expertise and your energy to try to make a breakthrough in your institution. Be the difference. And if you're willing to do that, you will begin to stand out. And also try to bring something different to it, bring energy to it, bring life to it. It doesn't have to be droll, it could be fun. And there's so much that is grist for our mill, the academic mill. So many things in areas where you can help students and work with students. But I would also urge you, as you move along and move up the ranks, try to always stay close to students. Don't get caught up, because academic administration can be very, very bureaucratic. And I'm telling you, you cannot fall in love with the paper, fall in love with your students and stay close to them. That would be my counsel.
That's great.
And by the way, I want to mention also, I have quite a number, my faculty is spread out all over the country and some in foreign countries. And I'm having a hard time getting them to come back.
Sure.
Because, they've gotten used to being at home and they teach remotely. And so we're having some challenges with that. And but I'm expecting to have those challenges going forward. It's just the way it is.
Yep. Zooming from Paris or Cartagena may be very appealing to some people.
Absolutely.
So I've often heard that a higher education career is an extracurricular career, much like you expect students to go to class and then be involved in clubs and be involved in things, that the same thing is expected of those who work in the field, that it's beyond a 9-to-5 commitment. It's really about being part of the community.
Well, definitely not a spectator sport.
No.
But I think what drives our interest in this is because it should comport with your values. And if you love an institution and it's part of you and your values, like mentioned earlier, you feel like it represents you professionally, then it's not work. It's just an extension of who you are as a person.
Yeah. Jonathan, any final thoughts or recommendations?
Yeah, this is absolutely stellar advice from my experience. But I would say for those of you who are in the field and want to continue your careers, or those of you who aspire to it, education, higher education specifically, is absolutely the greatest determiner of your professional success. And in this society, that means a lot, because although we are in the midst of a great resignation and people are deciding they'd rather stay home and raise chickens and make stained glass windows at their kitchen table, we are still in a world where most of us need to earn a living and have a career, and that our personal lives are very much tied up in our careers. And higher education is all about personal and professional development. And from these folks here, again, Dr. Evan Beck is a storied academic of national prominence, right? A very, very impressive man. And Tatum and Ben and Charles is going to lead the business school at my beloved undergrad alma mater, and Janet is raising buckets and buckets of money for Baruch. And, this is meaningful work. And yes, there are huge challenges and there are huge changes, but there are massive opportunities. And if you're passionate about this, it's a wonderful life. And I encourage you to go out and find your path, and feel free to connect on LinkedIn or any other way, and happy to have offline conversations for anyone who's interested.
Thank you so much. Scott, any final words?
Well, I can't thank each of the panelists enough. It would have been so great if we could be together, but I don't know if we could have had conversations of this quality if we were together. That each of you has really shared from the heart in really important ways, and helped us to learn more about how we can serve students better. I hope you'll join us on this LinkedIn, this great new tool we have where we can all network and help one another find mentors and peers to work together, because I think it's all about our values, which you all have so well articulated. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Scott. To all of our panelists and to our attendees, this has been a truly fascinating conversation. And what's so exciting, as Scott said, is that we can continue this on the LinkedIn platform. And I look forward to having more conversations of this caliber. We have talked about institutional effectiveness as possibly one of our future topics. If you have a topic that you would like to speak on, or you would like to recommend that we present moving forward, please contact me. I'm putting my email address into the chat. Would love to have any volunteers who want to help steward this network moving forward. We can plan a conversation together in the next several weeks to see how we can elevate the conversation. And with 3,000 alumni in the field, we are a force. So perhaps we can make some of those changes we're talking about, be nimble as we've discussed, and find those places where we really feel at home and where we can make a difference. So I wish you all a wonderful afternoon. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay excited about the world of higher education. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.